Let me tell you about my guest today. Here in Australia, there's usually like a red-faced politician who claims to be speaking for the farmers, and he does this normally while he's standing, sweating, in a box fresher Cobra in front of a dusty field. Well, I'm here to tell you that as far as my guest today is concerned, those politicians do not speak for her, her farm, or any of the farmers that she works with. Dr. Anika Molesworth is a founding director of Farmers for Climate Action, a national network of over 5,000 Australian farmers undertaking meaningful climate action. She's the author of the best-selling book, Our Sunburnt Country, and as we head into an election here in Australia, look, it's really important to learn about how the very people that we rely upon for food every day, how they are already tackling climate change, and for some have been taking meaningful climate action now for decades to keep food on our table. This is a real eye-opener. Enjoy this conversation with Dr. Anika Molesworth. Hey, thanks so much for doing this. I'm really grateful that we're doing this
My
together.
absolute pleasure. Thank you for inviting me on.
I'm stoked. I'm stoked that we can do this. What part of the world do we find you in today, Anika?
So I'm on my family's sheep farm in far western New South Wales, so near Broken Hill.
Okay, that's far.
Yeah, it's pretty remote. I don't see a lot of people, I have to admit.
Are you closer to Sydney or to Melbourne out there?
Melbourne, actually, but we're still like 11 hours drive from Melbourne.
Wow. So I've been out to that country. I was lucky enough to go out there with work in the early 2000s, and it's stunning.
Yeah,
it's stunning country to be out there. You didn't grow up there though, did you?
No, so I grew up in Melbourne, so I had quite an urban upbringing.
And when you grew up in Melbourne, I'm sure it's much like we've got a toddler as well. We've got a toddler who's just 2 and a bit, and a lot of his books involve farm animals, and there's noises to make. And was that your relationship to farms and farming? And like, oh, it's, and vegetables are something that are in a cling-wrapped packet at the supermarket?
Yeah, that was more my understanding of, the food and farming system. It was, what every urban school kid knows. Like, you go to the supermarket, you pick something off the shelf. It only became, my understanding of what actually the farming system involves happened when I moved out to Broken Hill. And it was a steep learning curve.
Yeah, and so what was going on with your folks at the time? What were they into that they went, you know what sounds great, honey? What's that? A sheep farm 11 hours drive away. Brilliant! Sell everything!
Yeah, so my parents have like a love of the environment, and they come from an environmental field, so backgrounds in botany, geology, anthropology. And we had always spent like weekends camping, bushwalking around Melbourne. And my mum spent a bit of her childhood in Broken Hill, so we had like a reason to come and visit on our way to somewhere else. But we got to Broken Hill and we kind of just stopped here. And it was a nice place to stop because, as you say, like your jaw hits the floor. Like, it is an amazing landscape, like absolutely stunning.
My Broken Hill story is I was still running at the time, and I got up the day after the gig and I ran. I was doing about 12 Ks a day at the point, and wow. I ran within about 2 Ks. The irrigation stopped, so all the front lawns were no longer green.
Yep.
And then about 3 Ks later, there was just nothing. And I got out to about 6 where I was going to turn around, and I saw a wedge-tailed eagle as big as me just chewing on the carcass of a kangaroo, and it just kind of watched me like, I could take you, mate. I'm busy eating this, but I could take you if I wanted. And that's when I turned around and ran home.
Wise choice.
Big animal.
They are.
Very big animal.
Oh, they're incredible. Yeah, they glide around the skies up here over our house and our farm, and they're magnificent.
So your folks said, let's get this. They jumped on, realestate.com and went, that looks good. 3, 5, 20 car spaces and squillion hectares. Why go out there? Why choose that as a career path for them?
So I think they had always, loved being involved with nature, and I think they had an idea of some point would love to own a piece of land and just, live closer alongside the natural world, get out of the hustle and bustle of the city. And, this place came on the market, and when we came and visited it, we all fell in love. And it was sort of 1999. It was green. There was kangaroos bounding over the paddocks. There was water in the dams. And for me, a kid from Melbourne, I was like, oh my gosh, this is the most incredible playground. Canoes on the water, horses in the paddock. And I think I fell very quickly for this place and realized, I want to spend my life here. I want to take on the family farm when I'm older. I want a career, growing food for people, food that actually goes to nourish people's bodies. What a meaningful, work to do.
And what happened to that green, lush landscape over the next few years? As you, and bear in mind, you were 12 when you got there. So
yeah.
Not only are you, and my stepdaughter was 10 when I met her, and the difference between who she was when she was 10 and who she was when she was 14 was very different. So not only are you going through this vast transformation, but the land around you began to change, didn't it?
Yeah, it sure did. So the year 2000 was the start of the millennium drought, the 10-year-long drought here in Australia. And that impacted, much of the country, especially the far west region of New South Wales. We were very badly hit by this drought time. And over the seasons, over the years, I watched the water evaporate from the dams, the vegetation blow away in the dust storms. We trucked off the sheep that we had purchased, selling them to ease the grazing pressure on the land. I saw, the mental toll it was taking on people around me, people becoming stressed and agitated. And a drought doesn't have, a defined end point. You don't actually know if it's going to end next week or in 5 years' time. And so there is that sort of growing angst and concern. And as a farmer, you feel a great sense of responsibility, like you are a caretaker for this parcel of land. You are looking after the welfare of your animals. You are, part of the backbone of your community. And when you sort of see that break apart, it really does, take a toll on you at a very personal level. So watching that occur around me, had a really big impact on me.
What was it like watching your parents, these people who, with such great love of country and love of nature, witness, they'd taken their family to this utopian place and witness this kind of dream they had just kind of falling to bits? What was it like watching? Because I'm sure their experience is very similar to some of your neighbours. I call them neighbours. You probably can't walk there. What was that? I'm sure that this experience is probably very similar to people in your community. What was it like watching your parents go through that?
Well, as a kid, I think I didn't quite grasp the concept of what drought was at that time. Yeah, it's drying out around me, but I didn't quite understand the gravity and the magnitude of it until, seasons rolled into years. And I was like, gosh, this is actually really bad. And this is really impacting, the family, the business, the whole community, the whole region. And, you do carry that concern as a kid too. And especially someone like myself who loves animals so much, loves being outdoors. And the emus disappeared. The kangaroos vanished. I would go for walks in the paddock and it was silent. There were no birds anymore. And you really start to question, what is going on around you?
That sounds spooky.
Yeah, it was. It was really eerie. So you have this, this unknown, event that you can't quite comprehend what's going on around you. And then also, you're experiencing things like dust storms. And dust storms are these, giant monsters of sand that you see like coming on the horizon. You know, the horizon turns this rust color, then this deep burgundy, and then they just roll and become larger and larger, you know, reaching right up to the skies and completely engulf you in your house. And, you know, in the really bad ones, it would turn day to night and you couldn't go outside. And you feel very, very insignificant. You know, there's obviously, as a kid, you're like, oh my God, like what's going on? There's an air of excitement too, but there, you know that this is a bad event occurring around you and you have to sit and wait it out.
And from what I understand, like that's like topsoil and a lot of the stuff that we need to produce nutritious food that allows us to get through our day just vanishing.
Absolutely. So that topsoil is a very thin and fragile, you know, membrane of life. It stores the carbon, the nutrients, the seed bank. And when that is whipped up and blown away, sometimes, you know, thousands of kilometers away, all the way to Sydney or Melbourne, you're losing that precious layer of nutrient and layer of life. And you know that it's having real damage on your land.
At the time, I was living in America for a lot of this period, but I was here for enough of the time, and you know, I'd go to the grocery store and be like, "Oh wow, lettuce is expensive." Moving on. That's about as much as it was for me, you know. And I have a very similar, you know. I guess we'll go without ice cream this week. Ice cream's $7 a bucket. Maybe we won't have ice cream this week, so we can, you know what I mean. Like it's just like the grocery bill is a few extra bucks, but that's about the impact that you see living in the suburban area. Do you think that if we were face to face with these cataclysmic dust storms, if we were face to face with the emus vanishing and the kangaroos disappearing, would we take it more seriously than just, oh, the register's a little different this week?
I definitely think so. And I've, you know, been on trips to Sydney and people go, oh, I'm so sorry, it's raining here today. And I sort of like look at them almost in disbelief going, oh my God, like, do you understand like the lifeblood that rain is, and that, you know, we're experiencing our 6th year of drought out there, and that really does impact what we can grow and where we can grow food for you. And so there has been this incredible disconnect between people and the natural world. We have somehow like disassociated ourselves from the planet and think that we operate in isolation. And that obviously has had very real and very poor implications for the planet, that we think the way that we can consume, use, exploitate natural resources, the way that we can ignore extreme weather events like droughts, floods, and bushfires and carry on as, you know, business as usual. It's not working, and that's why we're seeing, you know, this degrading environment around us and the flow onto a degrading social fabric as well. And I think this is why I do so much in the communication space and trying to connect people to land, to describe these incredible landscapes around Australia, the beautiful species that we share this planet with, to help them feel connected, to help them understand that we are so lucky, this place is so fragile, and we have a responsibility to look after it.
The disconnection between, and it's astonishing that we just have this experience of, we drive our car to the grocery store, and panic buying pre-lockdowns aside, the shelves are always full and everything's fresh and everything's in season, and we don't even think about it. We're probably listening to a podcast or tooling around on our phone while we just shove things in the trolley, and we're out of there in 13 minutes or less. And we're back in the car, we throw it all in the fridge, and we flick on some Netflix. Like, the idea that care for our land, care for country, positive action on climate is linked to our food security, that has been completely disconnected.
Oh, absolutely. You think of like climate and environment over here in one little sphere. You think of like food and what's on your plate over here. farming is something else. It's like, no, this is one and the same system. And what we do, how we interact at any of these touch points has a flow-on effect, either positive or negative. But we somehow have lost that understanding that this is a very interconnected, complex system. And therefore, the way we interact with it and our responsibility to act, appropriately is going to either, make the system or break the system.
To act appropriately is what I'd like to get to at the end of this conversation. But at what point, you were still a teenager when this is all going on. You're in your mid-teens, you're in your fifth year of drought, you're possibly still going, still want to take over this farm. At what point did you start to go, maybe this is not just weather. Maybe this is something bigger. What else is going on here? When did you start to first explore the idea of permanent changes to the weather patterns and global warming?
Well, my dad borrowed from the old video store Al Gore's An Inconvenient Truth. And
the classic.
Yeah, I know. Those beautiful Friday evenings of walking around the aisles, choosing which video to borrow for the weekend.
All right, everybody gets $1 weekly, and you'll need to agree on one year release. No fighting, we're out of here in 3 minutes, or no pizza.
Oh, that's it. Nailed it. And yeah, my dad, borrowed An Inconvenient Truth, and I couldn't believe it, and, put that on for our Friday night movie. And, I complained and whinged a lot, thinking, gosh, I don't want to watch a film about the weather. How incredibly boring. But as I sat there and watched it, it was like the dots were connecting in my mind. Okay, so we people are, extracting fossil fuels from the ground, we're burning them, we're putting dangerous emissions into the atmosphere. This is destabilizing the climate. This is causing more frequent and intense droughts, floods, bushfires. That's having very real impact on communities, on the economy. And the story just clicked for me. And I went, wow, okay, this is climate change. And then I was able to walk out into the paddock and see, the drought, feel the heat waves, see the dust storms and go, I get it now. Like, I understand that the way that we humans are interacting with the planet is, actually contributing to these problems that we are experiencing. We are the problem makers here. But then on the flip side of that, it means that we're the problem solvers and we need to fix this.
And for, I guess, the argument against for meaningful climate action has been for the last 20-something years, and we won't get into who drives it or who makes money off of promoting this. It is like, you can't have both. You can't have modern life and a way of living that doesn't impact so harmfully. Make your choice, because it's one or the other, and I don't want to live without my whatever. All right. But that's not the case, is it, at all?
It's not at all, yes. Unfortunately, there are a lot of misleading, toxic narratives out there which corral people to think and act in certain ways. And they make us fear the future. They make us worry about transitioning to something else. They talk about sacrifices, job losses, damage to the economy. And it is terribly dangerous. They are terribly dangerous words and thoughts, I believe, because it encourages the continuation of what we're doing, the status quo, and it encourages very poor behavior and interactions with our planet. And that is putting us directly on a path of danger. So we need to absolutely, challenge that narrative, put out better ideas, thoughts, commentary about this topic, and do it in a truthful manner. It is saying, yes, the evidence shows us that it is bad, that we are at a point of crisis and we need to observe the science, but not then bury our heads in the sand or hide under the dune or in fetal position and go, someone else should do something about this. It's actually stepping forward and go, well, we all need to do something about this, every individual, every sector, and we can do something about it. And when we do these things, these abundance of solutions that are actually within our reach, within our grasp, there is a flow of positive benefit that actually we receive from it. And so, putting it in that positive narrative makes people go, oh, okay, yeah, we can do this and we should do this.
The idea of the way forward is some sort of agrarian subsistence farming where we all that's impossible. It's like you could sooner de-electrify a city than ask every citizen in the country or whatever part of the world you're in to grow their own food. That's not how it is. We are a community, we are a society. We have developed and shifted to live in massive population groups, and we rely on parts of the land that lots of people don't live in to provide us food. And there are many, many, many ways that we're not waiting for things to be invented. There was, how shall I put this, a recent very high-profile plan put forward that had some gaps in how we're going to do things. There's no gaps. Like it's right there, and it can be done. It just needs, as you said, the commitment to do it, and putting forward the idea that there's actually abundance when we do these commitments is, it seems like bonkers for people. They look like they've been slapped when you tell them this.
That's it. And as you so rightfully say there, I mean, it's not an issue of knowing what to do or having the technologies or practices to do it. We've got all that. We know what to do. We've got the technologies. We've got the practices. At this point in time, it's willpower. It's determination. It's actually like putting that behavior in action and putting those solutions in place. And we can absolutely do that.
There's a line of yours that's harrowing as it is positive, that the biggest threat to our planet is the belief that someone else will save it. And that's...
Yes.
It's real. But I'd rather not get to the point where half the freeway is washed away at every river mouth on the way, north, and people go, oh, maybe we should do something because these floods keep coming. Maybe before we get to that, before we have to spend so much money on rebuilding infrastructure, maybe let's make a move, because that's, it's not an if, it's a when.
Absolutely. And I think this is why I love working in the rural community too, and the farming community in particular, because every day there is a new challenge thrown your way, whether it is, the cattle have pushed down the fence and got into the neighbor's yard, or the tractor's bogged, cleaning out the dam. There's another challenge. And the farmer generally doesn't sit back on the couch, arms folded, and go, someone should do something about it. They get up, they go outside, pair of pliers and some wire in hand most time, and they fix the problem. And I love that mentality of just getting on with it. Yes, there are problems every single day that are thrown our way, and they are our problems that we need to solve. We need to get off our backsides and actually do something about it. And climate change is no different. Every single one of us is contributing to this issue, to this problem in our lifestyles, but that means every one of us can actually make tweaks in our lifestyle, whether it's to do with, our purchasing habits, the way we eat and consume resources, the way we, vote, use public transport or otherwise. All of these aspects in our lives can be improved by being more conscious about what we're doing and how we're living.
I've got skin in the game when I ask you this question, Anika, and I want you to be 100% sure that I mean it when I say it. What anybody else wants to put in their mouth is completely up to them, doesn't bother me at all. And as someone with a PhD in agroecosystems, where does the role... I haven't eaten meat in nearly 20 years, and it was purely, much like yourself, it clicked for me, the impact of animal agriculture on our food supply, on our water security, on our land use. That's a lot of, raw material to make this much protein, when this much raw material and this much land can make the same amount of protein. Easy. And that's been that way ever since for me. That's my choice and my choice alone. As someone with a PhD in agroecosystems, where do you see our dietary habits fitting into this climate solution that we have to find?
So important, so important. And especially when people go, oh, the climate problem it's so big, so complex, I don't even know where to begin. Like, begin with your food. Begin when you open up that fridge door or you walk down the supermarket aisle. Like, what you put on your plate, how you consume it, how you waste it, does have a very real impact on the whole food system and obviously the climate system, which is very much interlinked in that. So by selecting food which is local, seasonal, nutrient-dense, native foods, generally plant-based foods, they are climate-smart foods. By avoiding foods that have been flown in from the other side of the planet and wrapped in styrofoam and plastics, that reduces our carbon footprint. And also by, spending appropriately, by fairly compensating the farmer, you give them the financial resources to manage that land in the best way possible. So they can destock, remove livestock when the drought is really bad. They can put out, new irrigation infrastructure so they're using less water to water their crops. That gives them the financial resources to make improvements that we need in the farming system. And also, how we waste our food in Australia is ridiculous. Like, I think we throw out 1 in 4 supermarket bags of food, and if food waste was a country, it would be the 3rd largest emitter. That is ridiculous. So just the simple fact of finishing your meal and not scraping half of it into the bin goes a long way in helping to solve this problem.
The tricky question, the actual elephant in the corner of the room, is the atmospheric impact of livestock. Not even the ethics of it. Like, cows and sheep and pigs, they fart, and methane is not good news. When it comes to meat in our diets and the raising of animals, what do you see is the future for not only people who've got generations of their families raising these animals and, how they may move forward to a more sustainable way, or, people who have deep family traditions in this is the meal that mum makes. How might that move forward in this, now we can't ignore it. It's a fact. How might we move forward from that?
Yeah, well, I guess 2 things in that comment that, going back to what we were speaking about earlier, we do generally have, the knowledge and the technologies to get on top of the climate problem. Now it is more of a cultural, structural and political issue. And culture, as you say, the way that we have produced food over generations, a lot of farms are multi-generational businesses. They have been passed down from their parents, their grandparents, and so the way that food has been produced is rather deeply embedded into rural communities. There's also obviously, although this is improving over time, but rural people are geographically isolated. They're far away from, the research institutes that are coming up with new innovations, new understanding, and we have to do a lot better of actually getting good information out here in the rural areas to make sure that they are, keeping on top of the science, understanding what ways they can adapt and change their farming businesses, and as a society making sure they have the financial resources to be able to do that. Going back to the methane emissions from livestock, so ruminant animals, sheep, cattle, goats, they produce methane. They burp methane as part of their gut digestion process. There is a lot of research being done in this field of how do we reduce methane from livestock, and that can be through better genetics. It can be through feed supplements, such as feeding a small portion of algae to ruminants, reduces the methane being emitted. And actually, Meat and Livestock Australia has an incredible ambitious target of being carbon neutral by 2030. And when I look across the farming sector, again, this is why I'm so proud to be part of the agricultural sector, it has some of the most ambitious climate targets in place across all the different sectors. And the farming community is absolutely striding in this space because we live and work so closely with the natural world. We understand that it's changing. These places are our homes, they're our businesses, they are our culture, they are our past and our future. And that's why I'm so interested in looking after them and looking after the landscapes as well as the animals that are in our care under our responsibility. So there is a lot of need for further, investment into research, development, extension, so farmers have the capacity to amplify and expand their efforts that are already being done. But farmers obviously can't do this alone too. Changes in the agricultural sector are more slow-paced and more difficult because you are working with crops, you are working with seasons, you are working with animals. And that's why we absolutely need to be expanding the conversation to such as the energy and the transport sector and make sure they are pulling their weight, because it is a lot easier and a lot quicker to cut emissions from other sectors than it is from agriculture.
When I hear about and when I read about, and you mentioned you touched on it, like a couple of years ago when I started to read about adding seaweed when adding seaweed into feedstock for cattle and the amount of methane reductions that were possible there, it really I was so buoyed by that. And again, I'm not someone who eats it, but for people that do, it's like, wow, this really is. It's like people trying to find solutions that allow this lifestyle that we hold on to. I mean, there's no greater love than the love of food. Like, it truly is. Food is so important to who we are as people and how we connect. And when I see things like that, and I see, a community of farmers who do get a bad rap, especially when it comes to regional Queensland MP seats, when it comes to a community of farmers, it's like, there's a misconception that people aren't forward thinking, and it's a misconception that people are challenged by change. Like, what do I need to do to keep my cattle farm, sustainable, or, economically and environmentally? Now the two things are converging. Great change. Brilliant. Let's do it. Hit the go. Let's do it. Let's change our farming practices. Let's go. Where do you see, Anika, the disconnect between the farmers that you lead as part of the Farmers for Climate Action? Where's the disconnect between those farmers and what the shall we say, red-faced people in Parliament in suits who claim to be your voice? Where's the disconnect between those two people?
I have no idea who you're referring to there. Yes. So Farmers for Climate Action, we have over 6,500 farmers here in Australia who are championing climate solutions. And that is an incredible number of farmers who are stepping up, looking at, the science, the evidence in the eye.
What's the landmass? What's the landmass that 6,500 farmers are in charge of?
Oh, gosh. I would have to look that one up, Osh. I don't know.
It'd be fucking huge.
It's significant.
That'd be like the size of most countries,
exactly.
Bigger. Like, we're talking an independent body of people who are directly in charge of climate policy on a patch of land outside of government. That's what a bat you're swinging with. Oh my God.
Yeah, we have more members than a lot of political parties and industry bodies out there. So that goes to show the seriousness that farmers take climate change at and wanting to do something about it. They're not sitting back waiting for someone else. They're going, yeah, like, I want to learn about this topic. I want to adapt my farm practices. I want to reduce emissions from my farm system, and I also want policies and strategies in place so we can do this effectively. Going back to why there is a disconnect.
Yeah.
Well, I ask that question all the time, and I think there is a lot of reason why we are seeing a growing voice come out of rural Australia, especially the farming community, because there is such a wide and obvious gap between some federal political members who claim to be representing farmers and their absolute lack and dismissal of climate change and the seriousness of it. And we've got to correct that.
But a politician in an Akubra standing in front of a dusty field makes for a great stand-up TV interview, Anika.
It does, yeah. And we've got to move past those, those little catchphrases and those little glamour shots of someone wearing a Nakubra has the right to speak for all farmers. No, I mean, the numbers speak for
Always
themselves.
men too.
Yeah.
Every fucking time. It's always men.
It's unreal. And look, honestly, it feels me and it feels so many people out here in the rural regions that I speak with frustration, with grief, with anxiety, because we are living it. We are living the impacts of climate change. We are feeling the impacts, at our hip pocket, in mental health, in young people leaving our regions, in the welfare of our livestock, and with the beauty and vibrancy of our landscapes. And that's why we refuse to stand, as silent witnesses or bystanders allowing this degradation to happen, because it's not going to happen on our watch. No way.
I'm so grateful to hear you say that, and the conviction in your voice makes me so thrilled, Anika. As I mentioned before, the best environmental practice and the best economic practice are very, very quickly converging, and soon will overlap and soon overtake, if they haven't already in many, many sectors. What does a carbon neutral future look like for farming in our country, which is a particularly unique environment? It spans many, temperate climate zones to frigid climate zones. It's a very interesting, huge space. But what's the economic upside look like for farmers who may have, I don't know, I've got 50,000 head of cattle, had that in the 70s, my granddad ran that, and now this is what it looks like.
We need to constantly be asking ourselves every single day, is this the best we can do? And absolutely adapting, tweaking, evolving, especially as new information comes to hand. And what we do on farm at farm scale, at individual level, really does matter. But it will be different on every single farm. What I do on my family farm will be different from our neighbour's property, because we have different labour resources, we have different financial capacity, we have different soil types and natural resources that we are working with. And so it's very difficult to paint a broad brush of these are the solutions that everyone should implement. No, it's going to look different for every single person. And we should accept that and celebrate that. Generally speaking, of course, we we absolutely need to be doing this. We need to be keeping vegetation in the ground. We can't be releasing more carbon into the atmosphere. This is especially important for high carbon landscapes, so primary forests, peatlands, those kind of things. We can't allow that carbon to be going up into our skies. We need to be making sure that we're looking after our soils, because there is a lot of carbon captured in our soils. And so by, treating them poorly, by releasing that carbon back into the atmosphere, that's also, contributing to the climate crisis. We need to be working with the researchers on things like, how do we reduce methane from our livestock? How do we think in a more holistic, big picture perspective of this is an ecosystem? How do we look after the biodiversity, the native wildlife, the plants? And also make sure that no one gets left behind. And this is then expanded to the conversation of a just transition of, yes, there are people and sectors and communities that are going to have to change more than others. But we as a society have, asked certain things of people and sectors and communities, and we need to respectfully work with them, understand concerns, fears, make sure that there is, a contingency plan in place, strategies to move forward together. And that will then take the fear and uncertainty out of this transition, so people, can look forward to the future, and they should be able to look forward to the future.
When it comes to things like side hustles, what can you paint me a picture of? Because it's this thing that I've heard. I don't know how real it is, but is there money to be made in carbon sequestration? Is there money to be made by farmers in, hey, you burn those tons of carbon, I'm going to store those tons of carbon? Is there cash to be made there?
Yeah, so this is an expanding market in carbon sequestration, which is putting carbon that was in the atmosphere back where it belongs, in the vegetation, in the soils. And the most important thing with carbon sequestration is that the carbon gets locked up for a long time, because carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has a residency time of about 1,000 years. So unless we're doing the same and locking it back up for that kind of time frame, and yes, you're chuckling because humans are not terribly good at thinking in 1,000-year time frames.
I'm laughing because if I don't laugh or chuckle, I will weep in agony. Because there's two reactions. There's laughing in the face of horrible things or letting it destroy me. And I used to let it destroy me, so I have to laugh right now, Anika. But yes, you've got to lock it up for 1,000 years.
We've got to be, thinking in longer time frames and not, 3 or 4 years.
A 3-year election term? Right idea.
Exactly. This is what our planet needs. And also, I mean, there's biodiversity payments, so that's also an expanding market of how do we look after native plants and animals and make sure that we have biodiverse and healthy ecosystems. So there is a diversified income stream potential as we move into these new areas.
At some point, some farmers may go, you know what, it might be more profitable to restore this landscape to what it once was. There's some farms that, if you've read, what's his name, Bruce Pascoe, some of Bruce Pascoe's work, there's parts of, rural New South Wales at least, which are now giant cattle or sheep farms that were just lush grassland, just that went to the horizon. Where is the value in farmers perhaps, restoring some of those native grasses and putting, looking after the soil that way?
I think there's a lot of potential there. And I think as Australians, we should really be celebrating native foods and opening that up, because rarely do I ever see any native produce on menus, on supermarket shelves, in recipe books. And that's really unfortunate, because I walk out in the paddock and I am picking and grazing, and it is the most delicious foods out there. Native spinach, saltbush leaves, little, ruby saltbush berries, which are sweet and sour at the same time, which just burst in your mouth. And I wish other Australians knew and enjoyed this food that we can grow here in abundance, which is well suited to our climate and soil types. So we have a lot of work to do in that space. I think it also then goes back to the fair compensation, because so often as consumers, we are encouraged to buy the cheapest possible food at any time of year from anywhere in the world. And we see ads on TV going, prices down, down, down. This is what you want. Buy it at rock bottom price. How is a farmer actually supposed to manage the land well or try?
I bought a Palmer, so therefore I can have cheap food. Thank you very much, Anika.
Cheap food does not actually look after the food system, unfortunately. It does not actually look after the farmer or allow them to do something different. I know a lot of farmers who would love to try doing something different on their land to see if it works better than what they're currently doing. But if they don't have the financial resources to do it, and we just have people demanding cheap rubbish, which they label as food, how? I mean, yeah. So we've got to change the way that what we're asking from the food system and what we're asking from the farmers.
Unfortunately, it is economically driven. That's what it is. And unfortunately, people pay the price. You will pay the price eventually. You will pay the true cost, whether it be with your health outcomes, or usually that's your health is what you're paying for eventually. That's where it comes out in your doctor's bills from your colonoscopies when you get to your 50s.
Absolutely.
That's where it shows up. So again, I know it's weird, and people sometimes have a problem when I do this because I don't eat meat, yet I talk quite openly about, my wife eats a lot of meat and it's fine. We've had probably 10,000 years of taking what were wild beasts And now there's no such thing as a cow. Like, that is a man-made animal. Through selective breeding, that's, we have created this creature, this docile creature, and same sort of species of sheep and, breeds of sheep. We've all seen Temple Grandin. The research that has gone into, getting this moving 800 kilos of future chops T-bones into a chute for slaughter and processing. There's so much research around that. And I'm just fascinated to know this. Has there been any research in perhaps doing the same thing that we did with whatever wild beast was a cow and is now a cow to, animals that are, and, mammals that are suited to our environment, suited to our climate? For example, kangaroo. Has there been any research in trying to maximize the farming of what was a wild animal and turning it into, more, this is something that should end up on your plate because it's designed for this environment versus this thing that comes from Europe?
I'm not too familiar with the research that is being done on kangaroos or other native animals at the moment. There's a lot of research being done on Australian, native plant species like kangaroo grass and things like that, where you could, have a flour from and produce flour from, and other seeds. But yeah, I mean, we are seeing more kangaroo meats on the supermarket shelf, but still not in the same quantity as other meat cuts and meat sources out there. And maybe it comes back to an educational piece too, explaining to customers to eaters that, the health benefits of eating kangaroo, both health benefits to the person and health benefits to the landscape and the planet. They don't release the methane in the same quantities as ruminants, of course, and they are soft-footed, not hard-footed like livestock, so they're more... they have less impact on the landscape and the condition of soil. And they eat native vegetation, so you don't have to plant introduced species. So there are a lot of benefits of actually looking locally first instead of looking at the introduced species and how we can tame our environment to grow something that is not well suited here.
And you said it's all about storytelling, isn't it? I mean, for goodness sake, we eat lobsters. They're a weird, strange animal, and we pluck them out of the ocean. It's wild. This how much tradition and culture plays in what we go. No, that's an okay thing to eat, but that is not an okay thing to eat. That's all we've just decided. We just one day decided cows yes, dogs no. But in other cultures, it's like cows yes, dogs yes, and all they've just decided and they're all cool with it. It's just a choice that we make as a community, and it's all in the storytelling. You mentioned earlier the food system and what do we need to help people understand that the food system starts with the farmer. She's out there, she's driving a tractor, she's sowing the seed, and the food system doesn't end at the supermarket. The food system ends at your rubbish bin or compost bin. What do we need to get that extra, 2 or 3 Ks for people to understand?
I mean, I would love people to be able to sit down at the dinner table, look at the food on their plate, and just take a moment to appreciate what is there, like the nutrients, the hard work, the labor, the resources that went into producing that food, because it is such a fascinating story, and it is a story that should be celebrated. And I think building that respect for food means that we are much less likely to then scrape it into the bin. So hearing more stories from the regions, rural people, the farmers, will help people understand what goes into actually producing food. And it's also storytelling about climate change too, because so often climate change, it's presented in a way that is abstract and academic, and it doesn't resonate with people. We've had evidence at hand for decades and decades saying how serious this problem is and how quickly we need to get on top of it before we do irreversible damage. And we've by and large ignored it or dismissed it or downplayed it. But if we speak in a language of, what climate change actually means to us personally, locally, Why I care about climate change is because when I walk out in the paddock at sunset and I see a 360-degree, fairy floss pink sky and there's galahs in the trees and I'm walking my Kelpie dogs with my parents, I love that place so much. Like, that moment is something that I want to cherish and protect forever. And I know that is in the path of danger at the moment because of climate change. And so that's my driver, and that's the story I tell, my love of landscape, my sense of belonging to place, my sense of responsibility to look after this amazing system and amazing location, a moment that I'm part of. So interweaving the humanity back into these conversations, these complex conversations around climate change, around the food system, and explaining it in a way that is raw and authentic and fronts up to the challenges of what we're currently experiencing. It is serious. It does require urgent action. But we also are incredibly innovative species. Like, we can get on top of this. We can work together. We are collaborative. We are caring. We do have compassion in our heart for our communities and for life around us. And if we actually celebrate that and bring ourselves together, we could get on top of this problem. And, I reckon we should.
Yeah, I mean, while we probably could get the calories and nutrition we needed from genetically modified hothouse-grown potatoes, aquaculture seaweed and desalinated water, while we could get by, I'd rather not. I like bananas. I really do.
Yeah.
Bananas are my favourite. All right? While we could probably figure out a way to deal with whatever is going to happen in the next 30, 40, 50 years, I don't want to. I like what we've got. I really do. And I think it's worth trying to figure out how we can protect as much of it as we possibly can. If you have 6,500 members, Anika, I'm guessing the conversations, you're one farmer, the conversations to get from 2 to 4 to 8 farmers, I'm guessing they weren't very hard conversations to have if you've got 6,500 members.
We only formed Farmers for Climate Action about 5-6 years ago. So in a very short period of time, we have grown incredibly. And when we first got together, a group of 30 farmers in the Blue Mountains, and we sat down and we had like this chat about, I'm really concerned about climate change, and I really think it's being poorly communicated in the media and by politicians and by industry bodies, and I think we should do something about it. And the rate of people joining and asking, like, how can they be involved? How can they help? We were just like, wow, there are so many concerned people out there who get that this is a problem, who want to be involved in the solutions. They want to be the problem solvers to this. And it's just so incredibly inspiring. And so I'm always encouraging people, like, if you have a concern, if you think that the status quo is not working, like, voice your concern. Put it out there in the world that something should be done about this. And you often find like-minded people, like, gathering around you and going, yeah, I will help you work on that.
You are petitioning the leader of the National Party, Barnaby Joyce, someone who has been known to stand up on morning television in an Akubra and claim to speak for the rural communities, the farmers of our country. You, 6,500 farmers, I'm going to guess people directly in charge of a landmass probably bigger than most of Europe. You are asking him to do something very serious, aren't you? Yeah.
We're wanting serious, ambitious, science-based climate strategies to be put in place. And, that's to save the planet. That's to save our food system.
I thought there was going to be more, but that's a pretty simple thing.
It's simple.
That's really it. That's really it. Like, it's not rocket surgery. It's like, no, this is it.
Yeah.
It seems lately that this party and I grew up in Queensland under the National Party, this party that claimed to be for the farmers. It seems lately this party seems to be more for the digging things out of the ground, shipping them overseas to get burnt than the farmers.
Yeah, absolutely. It seems that way. And I get, like, yes, the fossil fuel industry has been and is important here in Australia, and we as a society have benefited from that. And that's why we need to be respectfully working with the sector and the people who are caught up in these high carbon emitting jobs to help them transition. And that also includes people in agriculture, because we are also an energy intensive industry a lot of the times. When you look at dairies or wineries or, irrigating properties, they also want to learn, how do we wean ourselves off incredibly damaging, harmful fossil fuels which are disrupting our climate system, and embrace renewable energies. And, hurrah, we are the sunniest and one of the windiest continents on Earth. The potential to be running our homes, our businesses, our kids' schools off renewable energies is huge. Australia's chief scientist has said we could be a renewable energy superpower. Why aren't we doing this? Let's get on with it.
The why aren't we doing this part, I think, that is the question that a lot of people, I mean, I'm in a bubble. I'm in this weird kind of bubble of entertainment people. Oh, if only they did this. But if you've been through, God, if you've been up to grade 10, you can probably see cause and effect. You can probably see, oh, if we go that way, this happens. Well, let's go that way. It's kind of new, but it's probably better than that. You don't need to be that educated to understand this stuff. Why are we not doing something about it?
Yeah, I think that's a question that so many Australians are asking, especially when, if we just go back to a very fundamental level of why people care, I care about my family. I care about them being well fed. I care about having a meaningful, stable job for the future. All of these things are threatened by climate change and threatened by inadequate and delayed climate action. All of these things can be improved by acting on climate change now. So why aren't we doing this at the rate and the scale that is required?
That's really the question I hope people hold in their minds when they are looking at who they might be voting for in the next election and what they vote for with their wallets today when they go shopping, because that really is it. And on this show before, we've spoken a lot about it. Upward market pressure on industries is very, very powerful. So people have heard us talk for nearly an hour now. If they want to go, all right, Anika, I'm with you. When they go, you mentioned it before, but when they go about their day, about their week, what are some choices that they can make that will directly impact an industry and give the industry the idea of okay, the market's wanting this, we'll give them that?
Yeah, I mean, so often we feel daunted and overwhelmed by climate change. We think of, these corporations and these political systems as unmovable things, but they're not. We people as individuals have designed them and created them. And what we do in our everyday life influences them and how they behave and how they respond to crises like climate change. So the way we vote, the way we get around and move ourselves and our goods, the transport choices we make, the way we consume food, what we put on our plate, the price we pay for it, the way we waste it, our purchasing habits, whether it's, a new season's outfit or a new iPhone, do you need it, or can you choose a better supplier of that goods or service? And this is where I then start to feel quite hopeful and excited, because there is such an abundance of things that we can do that would actually improve our situation. So it's remembering that and being more conscious of how we're interacting with each other and with the planet that will actually, change these systems for the better and make sure that we have a vibrant, healthy planet long into the future.
The change is going to happen. It's just how quickly. It's going, because we'll be forced into it. It's like the 50-year-old heart attack victim who gets somehow defibrillated and gets the stern talking to, and then instead of just getting healthy, becomes a triathlete.
Yeah.
That's what we have ahead of us. We could wait for that, but it's gonna be harder the longer we wait.
Yeah, the longer we wait to act on climate change, the more difficult it becomes, the more costly it becomes. So we absolutely can do something about it now, and not just sit back and wait for someone else to do something, but do it ourselves. Like, be the leaders that we've been waiting for.
Talking to you and knowing that you represent 6,500 farmers who feel the same way just buoys my heart. And I'm sure that people have stereotypical ideas of what people in the farming community might think about, or how they feel about the world, or who they might vote for because of stereotypes, right? But to hear you and hear that the people that you represent are aligned with you, you're undeniable. And I can't imagine how any political party that is trying to or claiming to represent you cannot listen and not act and keep their job.
Yeah, I know. Tell me about it. Yeah, and so this is why it's so important that we get farmers' voices out there in the media, in the rooms with the politicians, on the nightly news desk, because farmers here in Australia, we make up less than 1% of the population. So sometimes it is difficult to get heard, and so stereotypes are formed, especially if there's a red-faced man in a Kubra pretending to be talking for farmers and describing what farmers think about climate action. And what is being described currently from some federal political members is completely inaccurate, is doing serious reputational damage to Aussie farmers, and is putting us and our industry in the path of danger.
I am so grateful that you do what you do. And thank you for the book. Sunburnt Country is the name of the book. And it's, Our Sunburnt Country is the name of the book. And it's a freaking great read. If people want to support you, how can they best support you, Anika?
So I'm on the various social media channels, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Insta. I have a website. I also put up videos. But if your listeners are really interested in the topic of how climate change is impacting farmers and the food system and want to be more involved in finding the solutions that are out there, jump onto Farmers for Climate Action. They have a fantastic website, social media channels. They are running webinars all the time to help educate and inform people and bring solutions and conversations to the table. So go and check them out.
I love my country so much. I would do anything to protect my country. When I think about the country that my kids are growing up into, I'll do anything to save it for them.
Yep.
And to give them that experience that I had of, I want you to see a wedge-tailed eagle eating a kangaroo and be afraid because there's still wildlife. I want you to have that experience too. And I'll do anything. And I'm sure, and when everyone really thinks about it, it's like, well, hang on, what? The food that I just take for granted is in jeopardy? Oh, shit. Like, that's what we've been talking about this whole time. Yeah, the food that you went and bought today, the food you'll go buy tomorrow to feed your family, that's in jeopardy. All right, that's climate change. And It's not happening in 20 years. It's not happening in 2030 or 2050. It's been happening 4 years and it's happening right now.
Yeah.
And there is something you can do.
It's not a concern for the other side of the planet. It's not a concern for a future generation. It's a concern right here, right now. And as you say, like climate change, it threatens every meal on every plate. And that's why we need to take it seriously.
Once you start threatening people's food, maybe they'll pay attention, Because, I like my cheap power and I like my big ute, la, 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 la. Hang on, what? What, man? There's no beef? What? Like, maybe that might get people to prick their ears up. Anika, you're incredible. Whatever I can do to support you, please do not hesitate. Please, please, please reach out. I'll be grateful to be a part of what it is you're doing, okay?
Thank you so much, Osher.